Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Yangxi. I've spent the last 6 years studying nutrition in China and Australia. Last November, I finished my master degree of nutrition and population health in Melbourne. Having the opportunity living in another country is a fantastic experience. The cultural difference between these two countries always intrigues me. As I'm passionate about nutrition, any subject related to food and nutrition is interesting for me. So the topic of today's video is about calcium. We all know that calcium is critical for our health and the strength of our bones. Both of Chinese and Australian government have already set up the recommended daily intake for calcium. In Australia, the average calcium intake is 800 milligrams per day. Although it's not optimal, it's quite high, whereas in China, it's just 338 milligrams per day. It's less than half of the recommendation. Why is China's calcium intake so much lower than the Australians? I did some research to find out the reason for this phenomenon. These are my findings. Firstly, affordability. Milk and dairy products are a great source of calcium. In Australia, the price of milk starts from $1.20 per litre, whereas in China, the cheapest milk costs $2 per litre. Someone may argue that it's not such a big difference, but I have to tell you that the average Chinese income is 5.6 times lower than the Australians. If you take this rather low income and the high price of milk in China into account, it would be the same as the price of milk in Australia being $11.20 per litre. I'm sure if milk costs $11.20 per litre, the Australians' milk consumption will drop dramatically. Secondly, eating habit. In Australia, milk and dairy products are very commonly used in everyday life. However, in China, very few Chinese-style recipes need to use these ingredients. For many Chinese adults, they didn't grow up with it, so milk and dairy products are not part of their diet. And once their eating habit is formed, it's so difficult to change. Meanwhile, lactose intolerance is much more common in Asian population than the Western population. I think that's another barrier that stops Chinese people to drink more milk. In fact, milk and dairy products are not the richest ingredient in terms of calcium content. Many Chinese traditional ingredients are a great source of calcium. People just aren't aware of it. As time goes by, our diet tends to favor high salt, high fat, animal-based food, and we tend to consume less and less of these traditional ingredients. This comparison of calcium intake between these two countries have inspired my thoughts regarding the policy of promoting calcium intake in China. My first thought is to effectively encouraging people to drink more milk, our government, Chinese government, need to firstly address the affordability of milk. It's so expensive here. Secondly, instead of focusing on milk and dairy product consumption alone, we need to figure out a more cultural appropriate way to tackle this issue. For example, we should let people know more calcium-rich ingredients that are also traditionally used in our culture. I think in that way, people can pick them up much more easily.